They rose in a world where gold traveled faster than kings, and where the quiet ink of a banker's ledger could decide the fate of a nation. In the heart of medieval Florence, while noble families fought for honor and bloodline, the Peruzzi built power from something more elusive: trust, credit, the promise of payment tomorrow as a weapon today. Their ascent is not a story of armored conquest. It is a story of numbers, contracts, and the invisible architecture of obligation. Yet this world of parchment and coin proved just as brutal as any battlefield. For one generation, the Peruzzi controlled the arteries of medieval finance. And then, with a single unpaid debt across the sea, their empire unraveled. The family began without spectacle. Records suggest a lineage of merchants, men who understood the language of risk before finance had a vocabulary for it. Florence, in the late 13th century, was becoming a republic of opportunity. The Mediterranean opened routes to spices, grain, and wool. Trade caravans stretched like veins across Europe. Where others saw chance, the Peruzzi saw systems. They pioneered letters of exchange, allowing money to move without moving. They tied regional markets together with invisible thread. Over time, their connections hardened into influence. Their offices multiplied: Rome, Naples, Avignon, London, Bruges, Paris. They did not march into foreign capitals. They arrived with books of credit and left with access to the corridors of power. Florence was transforming as well. Once dominated by nobles, the city leaned into mercantile ambition. Wealth replaced heritage. Bankers replaced knights. The Peruzzi were no longer merchants. They had become a financial institution. Led by men like Giovanni and Arnolfo Peruzzi, the family structured their operations with a clarity uncommon for the age. Partnerships divided liability. Correspondents delivered intelligence across continents. They monitored grain prices in the Levant, harvest, yields in England, and political tremors in Rome. The bank functioned like an early nervous system, reacting to pressure thousands of miles away. Their success was not luck. It was surveillance, discipline, and a willingness to lend where others hesitated. At the center of the European world, the Papacy drifted between Rome and Avignon. The Peruzzi inserted themselves into this transition by providing loans to cardinals, bishops, and administrators. Financing the church did more than generate profit. It offered legitimacy, and legitimacy unlocked clients. Soon, rulers who detested one another shared the same banker: the kings of Naples and Sicily, the court of France, the Scottish crown. They were united not by diplomacy, but by debt. The English crown was among the most demanding. England was a nation of wool. Its exports flowed through Flanders, creating wealth that Europe depended on. Whoever controlled the wool trade controlled a river of money. The Peruzzi understood this. They offered credit to English merchants, then to the royal treasury itself. When Edward II faltered, they adjusted. When Edward III ascended to the throne, young and ambitious, they saw an opportunity. He intended to press his claim to the French crown. But ambition is expensive. Edward needed funding to build armies, secure alliances, and sustain a war that would later be known as the beginning of the 100 Years' War. The Peruzzi stepped forward. They extended vast loans to Edward III, reportedly in the hundreds of thousands of florins. The exact figures remain debated, but contemporary accounts describe sums so large that repayment depended on England's future victory. The Peruzzi did not merely finance a king. They underwrote a war. Their money purchased armor, mercenaries, and diplomatic leverage. In return, they did not ask for glory or land. They demanded access to wool revenues, customs duties, and the machinery of English taxation. Their grip tightened around the English. treasury. This was the moment of contradiction, the moment where strength sowed the seeds of vulnerability. Loans created influence, influence created dependency, but dependency created exposure. The Peruzzi were becoming too entangled in forces beyond their control. Their empire resembled a cathedral built on sand. Each new loan raised them higher, and each new obligation hollowed the ground beneath. Distant markets began to shift. Grain prices fluctuated. Shipping lanes suffered disruptions from storms and piracy. Political factions in Florence destabilized the Republic. The Peruzzi adapted, but adaptation came with strain. Their capital reserves thinned. Their liquidity tightened. Their wealth was tied up not in coin, but in promises. And promises are fragile when made across oceans. Edward III's campaign did not unfold as quickly as he hoped. Victories were costly. Setbacks drained morale and treasury alike. To maintain momentum, he demanded more funds. The Peruzzi complied, confident that repayment awaited them on the other side of triumph. But war is unpredictable, and kings are unreliable debtors. By the late 1330s, Edward could no longer meet his obligations. He defaulted. Not once, not briefly, entirely. For the Peruzzi, this was catastrophic. Without repayment, their structure of credit collapsed inward. They owed money to depositors. They owed money to suppliers. They owed money to partners across Europe. But the cornerstone of their liquidity had vanished. News of the default rippled through financial networks like a contagion. In Florence, confidence eroded. Investors panicked. The Peruzzi scrambled to liquidate assets, but the scale of their exposure made rescue impossible. In 1343, the bank failed. Its collapse sent shockwaves through the Florentine economy. Other banks, including the Bardi and Acciaiuoli, soon followed. The city that had once engineered wealth through innovation now confronted the limits of financial expansion. For historians, the Peruzzi collapse represents more than a failed bank. It reveals the fragility of medieval finance. Their instruments were revolutionary, but they lacked safety nets. There were no central banks, no state-backed guarantees, no international courts to enforce royal debt. A king could simply refuse to pay, and a lender could simply collapse. The Peruzzi built a global financial empire before the world was ready to sustain one. Their story also carries moral weight. It highlights the delicate balance between risk and reward, between power and exposure. The Peruzzi mastered the levers of commerce, but they misjudged the character of their greatest client. They believed a monarch's honor was collateral. They believed victory was inevitable. They believed influence could protect them from ruin. None of these beliefs survived contact with reality. In the aftermath, Florence adapted. Banking did not die. It evolved. Families like the Medici learned from Peruzzi mistakes. They diversified. They limited sovereign exposure. They embedded themselves in political structures rather than merely financing them. This shift laid the groundwork for Renaissance finance. But the memory of the Peruzzi remained, a cautionary tale carved into the foundations of Florentine wealth. And yet, their downfall is not merely a story of failure, it is a story of scale. For one generation, the Peruzzi expanded the boundaries of what banking could be. They proved that capital could move without metal. They proved that influence could be purchased through credit. They proved that a merchant family could bend kings to negotiation. Their ambition reshaped Europe. Their collapse reshaped Florence. Their legacy rests in both achievements and consequences. In this tension, a final contradiction emerges. The Peruzzi controlled medieval finance at the height of their power, but they never controlled the world that surrounded it. They could calculate risk, but not weather. They could analyze markets, but not royal honor. They could predict yield, but not war. Theirs was an empire of intellect, yet vulnerable to the irrational. In this sense, their saga reflects the essence of finance itself, a structure of logic built atop the chaos of human nature. When we speak of them now, it is through ledgers and chronicles. Their voices are absent, their intentions are lost. But their impact remains, echoing not in triumph, but in the silence that follows collapse, in the quiet that settles after the last coin falls, in the realization that even the mightiest bank can be undone by a single breach of trust. The world that emerged after their fall was darker still. In 1348, just 5 years after the Peruzzi collapse, the Black Death tore through Europe. Florence became a city of shuttered doors and ash-filled streets. Trade routes froze. Markets withered. The logic of finance faltered beneath the weight of mortality. It is impossible to say whether the Peruzzi could have survived even without Edward's default, when plague and panic dismantled the foundations of commerce. But the timing allowed history to fold these events together, creating the impression of a single, unstoppable narrative. First the bank, then the city, then the world. Historians know better. It was not destiny. It was coincidence. Tragic, overwhelming coincidence. Yet human memory prefers stories with neat endings. And so the Peruzzi became the emblem of overreach, the caution etched into Florentine consciousness. In their lifetime, they had been respected. After their fall, they became a warning. The Medici studied them. The Strozzi invoked them. Every banker in the following century measured ambition against the shadow the Peruzzi left behind. That shadow lengthened as the Renaissance dawned. Florence rose again, gilded with art and architecture. And beneath that beauty, financial systems evolved, shaped by what the Peruzzi had attempted and failed to sustain. Their records, where they survive, reveal sophistication that outpaced their era. Their accounting practices used double-entry logic decades before it became standard. Their contracts outlined jurisdictional clauses for cross-border disputes. Their intelligence networks reported on political shifts with a precision that suggests something akin to modern risk assessment. They were inventing tools for a world that did not yet exist, and history rarely rewards those who arrive too early. Still, hindsight can distort meaning. It is tempting to describe the Peruzzi as doomed from the beginning, as builders of a tower too tall for the soil beneath it. That interpretation feels clean. It also feels incomplete. Their rise was real. Their methods worked. Their influence shaped policy and trade. Millions of florins passed through their hands. A century of Florentine dominance in European finance can be traced to the foundations they laid. Their collapse was not evidence of failure in design. It was evidence of fragility in the world they operated in, a world where institutions could stretch but not yet endure. For Edward III, the consequences were strangely muted. England would struggle with inflation and fiscal burden, but the king himself continued his campaigns. His reputation did not collapse alongside the Peruzzi. He ruled for half a century. He died on his throne. In this, a brutal truth emerges. Power protects debtors more than creditors. A king can default and remain sovereign. A banker can default and disappear. Some chronicles describe the aftermath in Florence as an echoing silence. The Peruzzi palaces still stood. Their insignia remained carved into stone. But the activity within those walls evaporated. Where clerks once hurried across marble floors, dust settled. Where decisions once rippled across Europe, nothing happened at all. Influence is invisible until it is gone. Then, its absence becomes a void. Generations later, the Peruzzi name survived only in fragments, in street names, in archival references, in the margins of financial treaties. Their descendants mingled with other Florentine families, their identity diluted by history's indifference. In contrast, the Medici rose to heights the Peruzzi never reached. They financed popes. They produced queens. They directed the political destiny of Florence. But the Medici built on ground that the Peruzzi had tested, mapped, and cracked open. In moments of reflection, a question emerges. Why did the Peruzzi risk so much on a single monarch? Why anchor their fortune to the ambitions of Edward III? Their ledgers do not answer. Their contracts do not confess uncertainty. But context offers clues. In the 14th century, sovereigns represented the highest rung of financial prestige. To finance a king was to legitimize one's status. Reputation was currency. And the Peruzzi were racing to define their place in a competitive landscape. The Bardi were rising. The Acciaiuoli were expanding. To hesitate was to fall behind. Their gamble was strategic, not sentimental. It was the natural escalation of success. Yet escalation is a staircase with no railing. One misstep and the descent is uncontrollable. The Peruzzi misjudged the angle. They believed the English crown could be steered through debt alone. They believed that access to wool revenues provided safety. They believed that risk could be managed through calculation. But kings are not variables. They are human. They are emotional, unpredictable, and vulnerable to forces beyond their own control. The Peruzzi lent to a monarch who wanted glory more than solvency, and they paid the price. When viewed through the lens of history, their story becomes a parable about the limits of influence. The Peruzzi controlled medieval finance, but control is not dominion. They could shape markets, but not fate. They could read trends, but not foretell catastrophe. They could calculate probabilities, but not enforce promises across kingdoms. This was the contradiction at the core of their empire. They knew the mechanics of wealth, but they underestimated the volatility of power. Today, the Peruzzi survive in ledgers and footnotes. They exist in the background of broader narratives. But to understand them is to understand the first attempt at global finance. It is to recognize the courage required to build a network that spanned borders when borders were lines of swords. It is to acknowledge the brilliance of a family that realized money did not need to move to be powerful. It only needed to be believed in. Their rise reveals what happens when intellect reorganizes the world. Their fall reveals what happens when the world refuses to be organized. In that tension lies their legacy, not triumph, not failure, but instruction. The Peruzzi show us that success is not protection, that innovation is not immunity, that influence is not invincibility. They remind us that even the brightest minds can be undone by the simplest truth. Trust is the currency beneath all currency, and when trust collapses, everything collapses. In the final accounting, their story does not need embellishment. It does not need myth. It requires only the facts, arranged in sequence, to feel cinematic. A family of merchants becomes a pillar of European finance. They lend to kings, they shape economies, they construct systems that redefine commerce, and then, in a moment, the center cannot hold. The largest debtor defaults, the edifice dissolves, the city trembles, the age moves on. What remains is the echo, the space where ambition once lived, the realization that history advances not in straight lines, but in waves, each wave building on the last, each wave erasing what came before. The Peruzzi were one such wave, powerful, brief, transformative, and tragic. Their empire lasted a single generation. But that generation changed the architecture of finance. And even if their name does not rest on the lips of millions, their impact lives on in the systems that govern our world. The lesson is stark. Wealth can conquer borders, but not human nature. Finance can accelerate history, but not outrun it. Influence can bend the present, but not the future. The Peruzzi built the framework, and history decided what to place upon it. Their rise was brilliance. Their fall was consequence. Their story is the blueprint for every financial empire that would follow, and the reminder that no blueprint is ever finished. Not while people hold the pen. Not while power is negotiable. Not while trust is breakable. This is what it means to meet the Peruzzi, a family that reached beyond their era and paid the price for it. Their legacy lives in the knowledge that even the mightiest bank can collapse, not from miscalculation, but from believing a promise that could never be kept.